nowadays. Comfort food. And I sat there, went into the staff room, a knife, and I've got a plate and a knife and fork. And
We have one apology from Councillor Fenn. Would someone move that, please? Moved Councillor Dunn, seconded Councillor Cranston. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary carried. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, thank you. We have had no requests for leave of absence nor acknowledgements and tributes. We have one public petition, and I welcome Ms. Ali Craft, who's going to speak to us this afternoon and has a PowerPoint. If you'd like to now come forward, Ms. Craft, and take one of the seats there, and I think Mrs. Conn has shown you that when you speak, you need to turn the button on, and then...
Oh, every time.
Or you can let it...
Okay, there we go. You can sit down. Wonderful. Or can I stand if I want? Okay. I just prefer to stand. It feels more natural. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for being here. We look forward to hearing what you've got to go. Awesome. Okay.
Have it on too. Thank you.
Hello, guys. My name is Ali Craft. I'm Gisborne born, and I'm also a member of Generation Zero. And today I'm here to ask for endorsement from the Gisborne District Council for the Zero Carbon Act. And I want to make you guys aware that the government is committing to enacting the Act already, but we still want to make sure that everyone's on board and see council support as important. That way, okay. Cool. So just so you guys know, Generation Zero is a youth-led organisation who works on climate change policy. We've done massive campaigns for smarter transport, livable cities, and independence from fossil fuels, all to tackle climate change. So some of the things you might have noticed us, we've been really prevalent. We got 11,000 signatures for the Sky Path in 3 days in Auckland, and we were a big, huge push in terms of the unitary plan and the development in Auckland. And there's been lots of other campaigns around New Zealand. And we've all done this for the reason we know we need to get to zero carbon by 2050. And now we have found a way. So introducing the Zero Carbon Act. What's really cool is that Generation Zero, we actually drafted this, and we drafted this with expert help. And it's a policy framework, that's what's really important, it's a framework that puts New Zealand on track to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And it bridges election cycles. So just for some background, the world agreed that we needed to not go above 2 degrees of warming. And to do this, we need to reduce our emissions. So how much carbon dioxide can the world emit? Well, we have a budget. And the thing about it is the faster we reduce our emissions, the safer we will be. And every tonne of CO2 emitted counts. New Zealand needs to get to net zero carbon by 2050 or sooner. And New Zealand needs to do our part under the Paris Agreement. So the awkward truth is that our emissions are rising. We went into the Paris Agreement with weak targets of 11% cuts by 2030. And this is just, when I say weak, this is comparative to some of the European countries which had a 40% goal, and they had a plan of how they were going to reduce. We had 11% and we didn't have a plan. And our forecast is that our emissions will continue to rise. That's from the Ministry of Environment. So what is the problem the Zero Carbon Act will fix? Problem number one, to get to net zero carbon, we need targets and we need a plan. We currently don't have either. The Zero Carbon Act is a way to push politicians to do what is necessary and to hold them accountable. So this is just an article, I thought, a recent article. Failure to do it will come up with a hefty bill. And so that was advice given to the Ministry of, and from the Ministry of Environment to the Minister for Climate Change, and try $36 billion. Problem number two, our approaches to climate change relies on short-term thinking. We need to be making long-term decisions. Silly short-term decisions like this one. So while other countries wouldn't consider going back to diesel, we are thinking of moving from electric trains to diesel in some areas. This is not normal for trying to move forwards to reducing our emissions. So how will the Zero Carbon Act work? It's about targets, budgets and plans, and it has a climate commission. So some basic ideas. I'm not going to go into too much depth, but I just want to say it's modelled off the UK's Climate Change Act of 2008. And the 5 main points is it has a long-term goal to have net zero carbon by 2050. And it also has short-term budget goals, so every 5 years. It has a climate change commission, which will hold the government accountable. They give advice on what the budget should look like, and the government should do what they say, or otherwise it has to say why it has not. And that also involves emission reductions plan and adaptation plan. Now, this is really important because we already have a significant amount of warming locked in anyway with emissions that have already happened. And what I want to express that it's a policy framework. So there's no specific policy solutions in terms of a how. There are articles, or I should say reports, written by the Vivid Economics one last year or the Royal Society, and that's about the how. But this is a framework to ensure that we have budgets and targets. And so the government of the time will write the how plans. And also some cool things about the UK Climate Change Act. As the Zero Carbon Act campaign, it was written and drafted by a group of organisations that got together and made the Big Ask campaign. They had very similar 5 main points. And what's really cool and what's really important to note is out of 466 MPs, 463 of them said yes. So they had really good, and what's most important is cross-party support. And here is the UK's pathways. So you can see their budgets and how they are on track. Now, I do want to note that obviously they were already reducing, and we do have a different environment over there. So what's important in terms of the New Zealand context? Well, we have the Treaty of Waitangi. We need to consider that. We also need to consider our relationships to the Pacific countries we look after. And also, there's 2 other things I want to mention is the 2-basket approach. So that's considering the methane gases and carbon emissions differently. And now this is really important because we need the whole country on board. And also you can treat short-term and long-term gases differently. Finally, the Firewall Principle. Now, I think this is a really important part of the Act is because in the past, the emission trading scheme has worked in other countries, but it hasn't worked so effectively in New Zealand because we have been able to buy overseas credits. And some of those overseas credits have been known to be dodgy. And we want to ensure, as part of the Zero Carbon Act, that the emissions reduction happens domestically. That's what's really important about the Act. I just want to say we're not working alone. These are some of our partners and sponsors just of today. So they're allies, and we work with them in terms of the campaign. And I wanted to express that it's no longer Generation Zero does not own the Zero Carbon Act. It is a movement. It is a movement of people who are concerned about climate change, who want a climate plan and see the Zero Carbon Act as a possible way of getting a climate plan. I just wanted to point that first picture on the bottom left, that was 5 of us went biking down the country from Auckland to Wellington to raise awareness for the Zero Carbon Act. And that's just visiting a local school. We've got all the students doing, we call it the zero carbon symbol. And so we want it to be an easy way for schools to get involved, to show their support, to have a climate plan, to show they're concerned about climate change and want a climate plan. And all they have to do is a little symbol like that. And this will be important in terms of the consultation process the Ministry of Environment is starting at the end of May. And I've also got a picture of myself holding, again, the Zero Carbon Act symbol saying climate plan now. Our focus once again is cross-party support to stand the test of time. And we have had endorsements from the Young Nats, Young Labour and Young Green. And this is really important because it's showing that across the political spectrum, young people want the same thing. They are concerned about climate change. We've also had endorsements from Z Energy. That's the Commissioner for the Environment. That was Jan Wright. She just finished last year. And now we have Simon Upton, and he also is endorsing the Zero Carbon Act. And most importantly, why I'm here today is after the Dunedin City Council, they endorsed the Zero Carbon Act in October last year. And so I just thought I would bring in some local policies under the long-term plan 2015 to 2015. The Zero Carbon Act could sit nicely in terms of the strategic priorities of resilience and environmental stewardship. And also here we have the local government leaders climate change declaration, which our Mayor Meng Foon signed. And what I wanted to point to is point 2 and 3, give our support to the New Zealand government for developing an ambitious transition plan towards a low carbon and resilient New Zealand. 3, encourage government to be more ambitious with climate change mitigation measures. Oh, great. So it needs to be a bit lower, but anyway, so why endorse? This was just a picture of last week. We were at the UNESCO Awards. We won an award for community groups. And why the Gisborne District Council should endorse is having a plan to reduce emissions is important. And a large focus of the Act is on adaptation, which relates to everyday working of local government. Having an independent commission would ensure the council is informed. And finally, the Zero Carbon Act will provide a structure to support councils tackling the challenges of climate change. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Thank you very much, Ali. Yes, we can only ask questions. We can't get into a debate with you. So Councillor Cranston first and Councillor Stoltz.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do you know what the key initiatives are that have been drawn in the English plan?
So why they have a different, it's mainly transport. You always do the low-lying fruit first. So transport's an interesting one. And also, again, they have a very different climate, I guess, in the fact that they don't have much agriculture and a lot of their industry is now done overseas. So that was already going down. So now it's the harder time. Now they're really having to tackle how they will reduce it. Obviously, the first couple of years are easier, but the most important thing about it is that it gives plans in advance. So 10 years, we'll know what our budget is, so we can plan for the how we will reduce. And so big businesses, they know what's looking ahead and they can start to plan around that. That's what's really important, is that it's updated and it's in the future, but not too far ahead, that you can plan.
Thank you. Councillor Stoltz.
My question is leading on from what Councillor Cranston just asked. I was intrigued when you showed the UK with the 5 budgets there. But you mentioned they were already going down and you just answered that. But then when you talked about us, you said we are going up.
Yeah.
So is that because of our agricultural?
That's a big part of it. But the thing I wanted to stress is that if we had a plan, we could reduce our emissions. So they have, like I said, the Royal Society report, there's the Vivid Economics report. If you go onto our website, there's the summary of the Act, but there's also the breakdown of like how we would transition and stuff like that. And that the solutions do exist. So, and what I'm saying is we're not telling the government how they will transition. We are creating budgets and frameworks to ensure that they look at it and to ensure that they're consistently considering it. Doesn't matter what government's elected at the time.
So then just leading on from the answer you gave, Councillor Cranston, you mentioned when you asked why the UK emissions were going down, you said they're doing a lot of production offshore.
Yeah.
Is that just not passing the buck though? Because the emissions are then transmitted by another country, or you know what I'm trying to say? Yeah. It's not really a solution, but it is.
But I think that was happening. That part's like happening anyway. That wasn't why they did it. It didn't relate to the framework. But the framework is ensuring that in the future they will reduce their emissions. And it has helped them because it's cleared, it's kept at the top that we do need to reduce our emissions.
Thank you. Councillor Forahanga.
Thank you for your presentation. It was awesome, Ali. I did want to know, it's also actually linked into what Councillor Cranston and Councillor Stoltz were saying. Like, I did want to know from, in your experience and you being, I guess, intimately involved in the Carbon Zero kaupapa, what are Aotearoa's low-lying fruit? Where would we be focused?
Like I said, transport will be one of the easiest ones, and electricity and stuff. Yeah. But like I said, I'm not advocating for the how. I'm saying the reports out there are there. We're just trying to create a framework, a policy framework. That's what I want to express.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Foster. Oh, welcome, Councillor Foster. My apologies for not acknowledging your presence at the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valley. So how would we sign up? How would GDC be an advocate of?
So I was actually going to ask you guys. In the past, they have passed a motion, I believe. That's what the Dunedin City Council did. So they heard us speak, and then I think you come together as a council and then you vote on it. So that's a way. Another way is that, like the Mayor of Whanganui, he just wrote a letter of endorsement. So he was asking what kind of points he should set, and we just gave him some suggested ones, and then he wrote an official email. And I do want to say that I think it's in the end of May, we've got like a huge list of, we're working with WWF of big businesses that are already supporting the Zero Carbon Act. It was released last year where they just said they wanted action on climate change, and now big businesses are going to be saying they endorse.
So how would we implement that? I mean, would we go to electric, start introducing electric cars to our fleet? And
in terms of, are you talking about the Gisborne District Council?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I'm not giving you the how. I'm just, what I'm asking today is that you will give a vote of endorsement. That's what we're really asking. That's my goal is endorsement.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Can I just ask you one question, and then I'll sum up with what happens from now. But I take it that Generation X is going around the country talking to all local authorities. Are you part of that?
Yes.
Work, yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens from today is if it's seen to be something that council wishes to pursue, then council officers will write a paper which would then go to council. At that point, we would vote on it. So the process of a deputation doesn't give us the right to vote on it right now.
Yeah.
So we thank you for coming and raising the issues with us. Obviously, there are a range of issues that need to be thought through about the implications for council, and then a report comes back to us, and all of council would be voting on it probably, rather than just this committee.
Exactly.
Or it may come to this committee and then we would recommend to council. So it could be a two-step process.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's whatever suits this council. I said in terms of the Mayor of Whanganui, we happen to just be biking past there, and he said, well, for a start, I will write a letter. So it's just whatever form and shape you can help support.
Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate that you came today. And thank you for raising the issues and your presentation. Excellent. Thank you. So we move to item 6, the confirmation of non-confidential minutes, which appear at pages 5 to 13. There's just one change of a wording on page 7 at 10.1 and the first bullet point. It should say upkeep of the meters. The last word, which says papers, should be amended to meters. Clearly, it's parking meters. Is someone prepared to move that those? Thank you, Councillor McLean. It's moved and seconded, Councillor Stoltz, that the minutes of the meeting of the 21st of March be signed as a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. I just want to ask one question as a matter arising. It's page 13 with respect to NZTA and our stock control bylaw, which I think is a really significant issue. And that was at the meeting of some 6 weeks ago. Council was meeting with NZTA officials about the bylaw, and we'll raise the matter of how we share the resources. It's less about here sharing the resources, but what is the process going forward of us ensuring that our bylaw is to be implemented and upheld?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we endeavoured to do at that meeting, or committed to do, was to bring a policy paper back in terms of what was being done and the implementation. That hasn't been scheduled into the programme as of yet, but we can look to schedule that into the next meeting. Sure.
I apologise to Mr. Zanham because I hadn't flagged this question to him, but my issue is more about the second sentence. NZTA telling us that our bylaw is not legal because we don't own and manage the state highway. And that, I think, is what we were meeting with them about. And I just wonder how many other local authorities have bylaws that are upheld on state highways, because the issue of stock control in our region is really important. And I think there's two issues in that paragraph, and there's the issue that Councillor Burdett raised, which is the end of that paragraph. But I'm concerned that they never appeared and submitted against our bylaw at the time we heard it. And now where are we at?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clearly there's a bit more work required by us, because in terms of the actual administration of the bylaw, we do it through the joint agreement through Tairāwhiti Roads on behalf of NZTA. So there is some work to be done in terms of getting some clarification around that and bringing that back to this committee.
Thank you. Councillor Stoltz, did you wish to say anything?
Yes, I'm just talking on that as well. When we listened to submissions and we worked on them, there was never an indication or mention from NZTA or their lawyers that we are making a bylaw that might be illegal, that they won't, that we won't be able to pass. So I was quite surprised when I read that, because we do make bylaws of places that we don't own, like people say jumping off the port area. That's a bylaw of an area we don't own, which is enforced on areas we don't own. So I was
quite surprised to read that, and it never ever came up once during the hearing. So, yeah.
That's my point entirely, that it was not flagged by NZTA at the time we heard their submissions. Can we leave that with you, because I don't think we can get any further.
If you could, Madam Chair, because we have to understand exactly what the issue is and what is the issue in terms of any enforcement of the bylaw, because I don't see it as a problem at the moment, but we'll have to actually come back to you on that.
It's just the sentence says we'll be meeting about the bylaw, so we keep that live and make sure we get an answer. Thank you. Are there any matters from the action sheet? I think the standard. And the governance work plan is there for your information. Any queries? There are no items of extraordinary business, nor notice of motion, nor adjourned business. So we move to item 10.1, which is pages 17 to 65, the amendments to the District Navigation and Safety Bylaw, which is there for you all to see and read. I just need to note, and Mr. Zanham's carefully going through, at the moment we don't have a recorded delegation to this committee to adopt the recommendations with respect to the navigation and safety, and so that recommendation needs to be amended to, this committee will recommend to Council to amend the Gisborne District Navigation and Safety Bylaw as per Appendix 1. And just supplementary to that, Mr. Zanham will bring back to this committee any items of acts and legislation that are not covered by the terms of reference on pages 3 and 4. So in the meantime, this paper is as it stands. The recommendation is the only thing that's changed, and we recommend to Council to adopt. Any questions on the paper? Thank you, Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, just page 25, 2.21. I was just a bit concerned that our push to get the bridge jumping sort of more formalised in a position, maybe getting pretty close within these parameters that this setting now. No person may dive, swim, or undertake related activities near the jetty, water, or quay, which is in regular use for berthing or unberthing of vessels. So I just wondered if we've got clarity that we're not within those parameters with our recommendations that we have diving
within 50 metres. This is not changing what's in place right now, no, Councillor Cranston.
Curious now, because within our community development, we are pushing to have the diving move to a specific area.
You want to make sure that area is not within 50 metres.
Yeah.
Can we leave that with Council Officer? Thank you. Ms. Kohuri is nodding, and it will be in her brief, I guess. I just had one question, which on close reading. On page 20, it relates to honorary enforcement officers. Do we have any of those, and are they generally the same people that are mandated as enforcement officers for other tasks within Council? Page 20 with respect to the description.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have 2 harbour wardens, volunteers that are honoraria in terms of enforcement officers. I'm not certain as to sure if there are wardens in terms of any other respects, but we do have 2 harbour wardens.
That's fine, thank you. Are there any other questions? So the amendments are tracked for you. Thank you, Councillor Stoltz. Moved Councillor Stoltz and seconded Councillor Forrihinger that the recommendations that this paper, we note the content of the report and we recommend to Council to amend the District Navigation and Safety Bylaw 212 as per Appendix 1 with a clarification with respect to the point Councillor Cranston made at 2.21. All happy about that? I put that to the meeting then. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. We're now having a presentation on the Waianaki Waterworks bush. Thank you very much, Ms. Kohiri, and Ms. Kohiri's leaving the room. Ms. Easton, up to you.
Okay, thank you.
You can see that better if you sit there.
That's true, but you can't. So I just thought that to introduce my paper, I'd do a bit of a presentation, which has got some pictures from the dense reports that the appendices to the paper. So just give you a bit of an overview. So I guess you're all familiar, but Waianaki, it's about 1,100 hectares. I think it's actually 1,067 of original native forest, which we have very little in the region of, and it's known often as waterworks bush. It's become quite degraded by the presence of introduced pest animals, and we have been working in partnership with the Department of Conservation for the last couple of years where they've been undertaking goat control in the forest. Probably the critical issue that we've been looking at in terms of its restoration is that loss of forest understory from the browsing animals, and that of course is the future seed source, as well as this big impacts on native animals as well. So just a couple of pictures to give you an idea of what's, I'd have to say this is the worst of what we see, so please don't feel the entire bush looks like this. So you can see on the left that photo, there's basically no understory at all. In fact, we haven't got a mid-canopy even, because it's been heavily browsed out by goats and deer. And then the right-hand photo is a pig wallow in the forest as well. So these kind of effects are probably seen worst at the edges of the forest, but they are, you know, some of the things that are giving us quite a lot of concern. So we've been working for some time on looking at what is the best way to manage the issue, and I guess to have a really good long-term plan rather than just sort of try and slap a band-aid on and actually it doesn't fix the problem. So first off, we had a pest monitoring program using the camera trap monitoring, which had the cameras out for 14 days, and that's been used to inform the pest management plan that's been developed. And also it provides a really useful baseline for us in terms of actually ensuring that any pest control is effective and successful. So just to give you an idea, the possum numbers, basically the bush is at capacity, carrying capacity for possums. So in the 14 days, we had nearly 1,400 possums visit the cameras. We also got very, very high numbers, probably at carrying capacity of rats. So in 14 days, 480 rats. Also, and the lures that we had set were not specifically designed for stoats, but we did actually capture 2 stoats coming past and 11 cats. So giving an indication that they're quite prevalent in the bush as well. And with the high numbers of rats, we'd expect there to be a lot of stoats and cats. They'll also be eating other things, but certainly rats are a big part of their diet. So just to give you an idea how the camera monitoring worked, we had, this is the grid of Waterworks Bush, Waianaki, and that's where all the cameras were installed. And we had great assistance from a number of volunteers from both Rongwhakata and Ngāi Tamariri, and also from a number of environmental and sort of outdoor recreation groups. And so those cameras were deployed on that grid basis. So I have real good confidence that we've really got a good understanding of the entire bush area and the state of it. Just some pictures of what is a family of possums that said hello to the cameras. Rats, that's a stoat, if you can just see there. sitting in daylight. So you tend to see them more during the day, but it's always a bad sign when you actually see them because it means they're not an out there animal. They're quite a secretive animal. So just for them to be seen, as I think a couple of meetings ago, a member of the committee mentioned you'd seen one running across the road. That means that they're present in quite high numbers. And there's a cat, quite a big cat. That's a good example of what feral cats look like. They are really big animals. They're not the sort of thing that I have home in my house. They are big, aggressive cats. And then a goat, which we still have seeing goats there on the monitoring, even though the goat culling operation has been underway for a couple of years. And just you can make out from that photo, that's some antlers from a deer. So we also captured quite a number of non-target species on the cameras to give us a bit more of an idea of sort of what was there. And I guess there was a little bit of excitement in that we did see some riflemen captured on the cameras as well. And just there's a picture. Hard to see, because they're quite cryptic little birds, but that's not a blotch on the tree. I should have done spot the bird, but that's a rifleman there. And that's actually a really great thing to see because they're a really good indicator of the range of species that are available for feeding. So, it was really heartening to see that. So in the very thick sections of appendices in your report includes the draft pest management plan. And so what's been looked at is 3 options, scoped and costed in some detail over a kind of a 5-year pest management cycle. And those options vary in costs depending on the way in which we undertake pest management. And I guess for any pest management discussion, that's always the critical issue. As you probably all know, the cheapest thing for us to do would actually be to apply 1080. That is also incredibly effective, but we are aware it's also something that there's some community concern and iwi concern about, but it's an option that's been included there and costed. In terms of, and we'll deliver the best biodiversity outcomes. The other 2 options are to still use toxins, but in bait stations, and then doing seasonal control for possums and rats using traps and other methods. And then the 3rd option is an entirely trap-based approach for possums and rats. So the costs vary fairly wildly, and you'll see that in your report. I guess I probably would say that in terms of the 1080 option 1, the first year costs really vary, and that really comes down to the willingness of the community to accept that as an option for pest control. If it's something that people are comfortable with, it's much easier to do than if it requires a lot of time and effort to organise. If we were to use 1080, normally what you do is contract a firm who that's their specialist skill to do is to do that. So, the last time 1080 was used in an aerial or large scale spread, I think it was in the 1980s in the Rokuma range. But we do use it as part of our biosecurity operations in some instances in bait stations, where we've had, checked with the farmer that there's no dogs around, that the area's not going to be used, so that there's unintended bykill. Because that's the major concern of 1080 use, is that if dogs particularly if they eat the dead animals, then they will also die. And I guess that's why it's something that really concerns people. Yeah.
Would that also contribute to contamination of the water source?
No, from an environmental perspective, 1080 is about the best toxin that you can use. So it biodegrades very quickly. It's really effective, and they have just recently used 1080 to eradicate possums, severely cut down possums and rats in the Hunua water supply catchment in Auckland. So it's certainly, I know that is a concern from people who are opposed to its use, but from a scientific perspective, it is actually probably the safest toxin that you can use. We certainly, in an area like Wainaki, we wouldn't use some of the toxins that we might use in another environment because of that concern about biodegradability in water, and that's particularly a toxin called rodificum, which is quite widely used for possum control. We wouldn't use in that environment. So just my last slide. So I guess the issue talked about in the report, that currently we don't have funding allocated in the draft long-term plan. And so this report's been prepared on the basis that we would seek external funding. As I say in the report, there is very strong community interest in supporting pest control, and we have received quite a number of submissions on the long-term plan on the council considering including funding for the Waianaki project. So that will come to the full council as part of your deliberations. Just in terms of assessing the resources that are currently there, we think that if external funding was gained for the initial knockdown, which is the big cost, then there is a lot of enthusiasm from community and iwi to be part of a volunteer effort that could significantly reduce ongoing costs of keeping Waianaki in a healthy state. And I guess the really big issue is that prior to making any funding application, we would need to confirm control methods. It's got a big impact on costs, and we haven't yet done that consultation, which must be done with iwi and DOC and those stakeholders as to what is, the appropriate pest control option. So that's my presentation.
So is there any, just one quick question, is there any money in the LTP for bullet point 4?
For
the bullet point 4, the last, on your last slide, prior to making any funding applications, we need to confirm control measures and have consultation and all those things that you just said.
Yeah.
Which is not free.
Yeah.
So has that got a budget allocation in the next year?
So I would guess that the consultation we envisage with start time. So it's not a budgeted item in terms of a particular budget.
All right, so some questions. Did I see Councillor Cranston? Thank you, Lord.
Yeah,
a couple of things I got really interested in down south. I was on the Queen Charlotte just earlier this year, and the two things I got interested in were trapping rates and mass seeding. The proportion of beech up there, is beech the only one that's doing the mass seeding, or is it other varieties as well, firstly?
So through you, Madam Chair, a number of native tree species do mass seed, but there is beech forest up there, so that's definitely it's a significant factor in thinking about control there.
Yes. Yeah, so that's a real problem, because your work gets underdone on a mass seeding year. So I mean, suddenly the rat population, mouse population, skyrockets straight after that. So that's quite problematic. There's not much you can do about it, I suppose. So
yes, through Madam Chair, I think that in terms of thinking about a pest control program, it's been assumed that you might have to every 5 years, which is about the average, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. You might have to do an extra, so it is essentially a 5-year cycle of hard, significant control followed up by maintenance for a number of years, and then you have to go back to do another big hard hit, just because unless we were able to, erect a predator-proof fence or something like that, we would still have animals coming in, and we would still have those kinds of natural cycles where we get increased pest numbers.
Okay. Yeah, and the other thing was the trapping rate, and I got a little bit confused through the report because it sort of talked about 500 metres apart, and then it talked about 250 metres apart, then it talked about 300 to 125 metres apart. And at one stage it talked about 75 by 75 apart. So I don't know what we've agreed on, but I can tell you that any of those higher ones are ineffective, especially for boats and that. The trial that I saw on the Queen Charlotte track was probably beneficial because it was covering off a peninsula, but it was a trial to work out best rates for traps. And at the neck of the peninsula, they actually had them 10 metres. It was like a fence line of traps. And they were getting huge effect. And the reason they were going to that was because, sure, you were catching the odd stoat and quite a few rats with your traps at a wider, a much more wider dispersion of traps, but it wasn't hitting it wasn't getting on top of it, because of the frequency of the traps. There were too many just walking past them because of the abundance of food, other sources, So I think, when we start thinking about this, frequency is a cost. It's a huge cost because traps cost quite a lot. But then if you've got the self-setting traps or something like that, and you haven't got the personnel that you need to go in all the time and reset them and all that, there may be some sort of equation that you can get to where more frequent traps, but traps that you don't have to go and set there. There might be a balance there that you can work out to get the frequency up where it's actually going to do the job. Because the indication down south was there is frequencies down there that people are feeling good because they catch the odd stoat and that, but they also go around their traps a lot and have nothing in them. And they have determined through this trial that the frequency isn't strong enough.
So through you, Madam Chair, I think this is an area where there's a tremendous amount of research going on, and certainly I attended a biodiversity conference last year where pretty much we had 3 days of discussion about optimum trapping rates and what was working in different locations. And I think that that is something that when we looked at the options here, there is a really high capital initial cost with trapping. That is essentially the problem. You've got to buy the traps. And if we're talking about those self-setting traps, they are tremendously expensive, but they've got some really good benefits, particularly when you've got the numbers of pests down. And I think that's kind of the key thing for management of pests in this bush, is that currently we're at carrying capacity. So some of the methods that might be used in a area where, for example, there's a lot of sites in Hawke's Bay where they've got very low possum numbers. They have different methods of controlling the pests there because they've already got rid of that vast quantity of kind of the headline browsers, the bunches, the possums, and also potentially the goats and the deer. So they're looking very much at the stoats, at the cats, at the rats. But we're in a situation where we aren't. We've got everything, and we've got lots of everything. So an approach to pest management over time would be to try and get the really big animals down to an ongoing maintenance level, and then move in to more intensively try and get rid of the predators who are then, so it would be a change over time on where you had your traps, if you're using traps, or your bait stations. So for example, in Hawke's Bay and these areas where they've got very low possum numbers, they actually have very wide apart traps because they've worked it out on the basis of the range of the animals. So the cats, they have a very large range. They'll walk many kilometres for food. So they're working on the basis that eventually they're going to get them. But in a situation where you've got lots of the animals, you want the traps close together because there's, they're more likely that they'll blunder into them quite quickly and you can get the numbers down.
Just a quick supplementary. Is there a trap which covers 2 or 3 species, or do you have to have a trap for each species, different sort of trap for each species?
Through you, Madam Chair, unfortunately, you pretty much need a trap for each species. So we talk about DOC 200s and DOC 250s and the self-setting traps. You can have ones for possums and there are ones for rats. So each pest has just got slightly different characteristics that mean it's not that keen on going for the same trap. And unfortunately, that is one of the real positives about toxins as well. So we can use the same toxin will kill rats and possums, and both of them will eat that toxin. And then we get a really positive effect in terms of the bykill on stoats, because the stoats eat the poisoned rats and then the stoats die. So that's why poisoning is the most effective method of pest control, because you get multiple species from one effort.
But not
Thanks, Liz.
traps. Was there other questions? Councillor McLean?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I hadn't given much thought to 1080 till I saw a program the other day, and it involved vets and Doc and 1 or 2 other people. And I think the 1080 does a good thing for the small vermin, but when you get to the larger one like the goat or a deer, it showed you just how prolonged the death was and how cruel it was. And as far as the rat was concerned, picking up the 1080, it showed you 2 or 3 of them taking it to the rivers, and it did have a drastic effect in the river, especially with the eels. So I just can't remember the name of the program, but it just sort of made me rethink about if we're getting rid of these vermin, it would be nice, to make it probably a bit quicker than some of them suffer, just as a comment.
Councillor Stoltz?
I have 2 questions. Lois, the first
One is, what have we been doing up till now in Wainaki Bush in regards to pest management?
Not much.
Not much.
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, we do allow through a kind of a licensing process people to go and do hunting in there, so managed hunting. And DOC have been doing the goat culling, so that's the pest control that's been done. I think that, to be fair, the amount of control that managed hunting does is very limited, because essentially hunters are just after the easy to catch animals, and often also a trophy animal perhaps.
And then just one last question I had, just out of interest, I'm not trying to be funny. With the cameras, how do you know it's not the same possum that just sits behind a rock and comes out and look at the camera and then goes back, and then after half an hour it comes out again?
3 different ones.
So through you, Madam Chair, they take photos at 5-minute intervals, and so you don't count if you see the same possum in the photo for half an hour. You don't count that it's 5 different possums.
But how do you know it's the same possum?
you do tend to make an assumption that if there's a possum in a photo and there's a possum in the next photo, that it's the same possum. So it is, it's not a perfect science. I wish it was, but it's a good gives you a good understanding. And it is quite likely that because in order to attract them to these monitoring tools, you have a bait. Yeah. So it is possible that you could get repeat visits from the same possum going, oh, actually, I really liked that bait, so I'll come back. So that is something that can happen.
However, we do need to be assured there are millions of possums out there that need to be trapped. Councillor Forihina, then Councillor Dunn.
How often because I heard our engagement in regards to stakeholders with iwi and with farmers, how often are we also engaging with our hunting stakeholders?
So through you, Madam Chair, probably the main engagement that we have had from a biosecurity perspective with our hunting stakeholders is actually to try and encourage them not to release animals into our natural areas. So that's one of the main sources of new introductions of particularly deer and pigs, is reintroductions by hunters. And I know that recently we've had, I think it's Roosa deer, has been released into the area behind Ruatoria by local hunters, which DOC are now trying to eradicate. So that has tended to be the relationship we've had. So we don't have there is a local hunting club, and I have to say I'm on the TB free committee, and they are as well. And they are very responsible hunters, but most hunters are not members of hunting clubs. So we work with the clubs, but most people who hunt aren't actually members of the clubs.
Supplementary, are we engaging with the hunting stakeholders in regards to our preferred choice, I guess, in regards to the biodiversity controls that we want to have in Waiṅaki?
So through you, Madam Chair, that would, in terms of who are doing the hunting at the moment through our licences, it's actually mainly Ngāi Tamanui iwi members, so they have a preferential agreement with us around that. So certainly they would be, people who are currently hunting in Waiṅaki would definitely be a key stakeholder to talk to.
Councillor Don?
Last year, my 10-year-old daughter did a science fair project on water, and I used it as an opportunity to explain to her where the drinking water of our city came from. And last night, I found the notes that she used on her science fair project, and I thought I might just repeat them so we don't lose sight of the value of this bush to our region. The Waiṅaki bush covers the entire upper catchment of the Te Arai River with 1,100 hectares of native forest. It is the largest piece of native forest in the eastern North Island, and Gisborne City gets its drinking water from the upper Te Arai River. Let's not forget that. I got quite grumpy when I read this report, not at the staff, just in general. Aerial application of 1080 in our drinking water catchment kind of freaks me out just a little bit. I know aerial versus ground application is an option. I'm very pleased to read that we are definitely doing consultation before we even consider doing that. Because should it get the green light, there's going to be some pretty strict conditions, I would imagine. In previous iterations of our draft long-term plan, I've raised that we haven't really recognised nor invested enough in water and also drinking water protection in our region. This was as governors. And this paper actually, unfortunately, proves me right. We've talked about biodiversity before. What this paper is saying is we've budgeted a big fat $0 to protect our drinking water catchment. Zero to protect the significant biodiversity and natural ecosystem services that Waiṅaki Bush provides us. That kind of blows my mind, and I find it rather unsettling. So I thought I'd try and have a go at blowing your guys' minds. And how about thinking about this? Biodiversity is actually natural infrastructure. Waiṅaki is a massive 1,100 hectare natural filtration plant. That's how we should view it. It actually stores and filters our water. In other words, biodiversity of Waiṅaki protects the quality and volume of water available to us. To us means 33,000 approximately people in our city who need water for well-being. It makes complete sense to value this resource. It makes complete sense to care for it. And let's also remember that if we do care for it, it lowers the wear and tear on our water treatment plant. And it also could reduce the level of treatment that is required. Protecting our water supply catchment should be one of the highest priorities of this council. And this report tells us that it isn't. And that's probably what upsets me the most. And I think we need to correct this shortcoming. Here's some of the suggestions I have. Let's direct our water team to invest directly in biodiversity protection. Let's request a portion of the sold water revenue that we collect every year and get it targeted at water supply catchment protection. In other words, let's use it for natural infrastructure improvements. Going by current values, if we took 5% of the sold water revenue, we could get 140K a year for natural infrastructure protection. We can't sit here at this table and say that we have a core strategic priority of Waitai Rāwhiti and then budget $0 for the protection of our water supply catchment. We've got a priority here, then we need to invest in it over here. Drinking water and its protection is probably one of our most critical responsibilities. Let's remember Cyclone Bowler. Let's reflect on Hastings District Council. It must always be one of our highest priorities that council funds. I can support supplementary funding, as in recommendation 2, but not a complete dependence on external funding for water supply protection. It must be a priority of council to fund it. I don't believe that the recommendations are going far enough. And so I thought I might push the boundaries a little bit here and ask for another recommendation. A recommendation that will signal to our community that the protection of our drinking water is indeed one of our highest priorities, and that will give effect to our strategic priority, Waitai Rāwhiti. It goes like this: seek inclusion of 100K in year 1 and 50K for years 2 to 10 in the 2018-2028 long-term plan for the Wainaki Restoration Project to protect our water supply catchment. I hope you all get the point now that the protection of water and the protecting our water supply catchment is probably my highest priority as a duty as a district councillor. Do I have any like-minded supporters that would help me put this recommendation in the report?
Can we just be clear about the second part? It's 100K in year 1 and 50 in year 2 and 3, or 50?
2 to 10.
In each year?
So 100K for the initial knockdown for year 1 and 50Ks for years 2 to 10.
In each year?
Yeah.
Of year 2 to 10?
Per year.
Yep, fine, I hear that. I wonder though, Councillor Dunn, it is the first step. I don't think anyone's ignoring the fact that water protection is really important, and this is why we've got this paper in front of us. The issue that you really have an issue with is there's no money beside it, and that this work is now being done that hadn't been done before. We'll come back in a moment because you've offered your... I just want to say to our urban colleagues, that large cat that you all saw a very good photograph of, if people drop their cats off when they don't want to take them to the SPCA or appropriately dispose of their surplus cats, that is exactly what happens to them. And they get from Whangarā in our native bush or in our hay shed, and they get to Wainaki, and they grow, just as Ms. Easton has shown you on camera. They grow enormously because they do eat the wildlife. It might be rats and mice. They eat baby birds, and they're the biggest nuisance. They spread disease. They spread a disease that is transmitted by turkeys and wild cats. They are really nasty things, and they don't come from nowhere. They've actually been delivered somehow to our slightly rural environs, and that is a responsibility of all pet and cat owners to look after your animals, and if you don't want them, have them disposed of appropriately rather than just take the easy option of dropping them off on a cat cage on the side of the road. My pet hobby horse, Councillor Stoltz.
I just want to go back to what Councillor Dunn was talking about funding, because we've had this discussion in the last 3 or 4 environment policy meetings where we are saying there's absolutely no money going. So what we're talking about today, though, is a 550K budget over the 10-year plan.
And thanks, Malcolm. And I absolutely support that, but I also want to ask Mr. Zaman, because I don't want us today just to philosophically, because it's the right thing to do, pass a recommendation that will then just be chucked out by council because there's no money. So I would like to hear from Mr. Zaman, because we have asked this question before about money and prioritisation because you and your team have a certain budget that you have prioritized around and decided what camp statutory stuff that needs to be done first, tick those boxes. So I want, if we make this decision, I don't just want us to make the decision because we feel it's the right one. It also needs to be able to be done.
There was one or two other, would you like to respond to that after? There was a couple of other people indicated they wanted to speak after Councillor Dunn made that, or are you happy to hear from Mr. Zaman now? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stoltz. Through Madam Chair, we have discussed this. We've had council workshops on this in light of what was initially put in the LTP. There has been some submissions on the long-term plan, and there will be. Lois, could you confirm if we've had submissions on the pest control?
Oh yes, through you, Madam Chair. I think we've had around 10 submissions.
So what I suggest is that we actually have got the deliberations paper coming to council with submissions on supporting the initiatives of, in particular, Wainaki Bush, and that would be the appropriate time for council to actually consider it along with the other deliberations.
To that, if we have submissions coming to us, say Forest and Bird and people that have made submissions to this, would there be numbers next to what they have recommended? Would there be numbers that we would be talking about on that day, or do we need to add these numbers today in order to have something to talk about to move forward?
Supplementary to that, are council officers going to recommend a figure as a result of your reading of the submissions? Because you've read the submissions, you're preparing a paper for us. Are you putting a figure beside it?
Through you, Madam Chair, council officers could recommend a figure in terms of the work that's been done. We could also consider what this committee has put forward in its recommendations, and both of those could be considered in the deliberations paper.
Okay.
There is a very rapid turnaround time, might I add, for the deliberations paper, in that we see a draft of it tomorrow, so we are a bit under the hammer in terms of actually doing that, but it could be an indication of where council might want to set a benchmark, and staff could come back with actual recommendations in terms of costings as part of deliberations.
Can I go to Councillor Dunn? Sorry.
Just supplementary to that, because the numbers that we are talking about today relates to those options that were given, option 1, 2 and 3. So there's thinking behind the numbers, and I'm just concerned if we take this into the 10-year plan process where we will listen to hundreds of submissions, 100 of people talking to us. I like the fact that there are numbers with thinking behind it, because it gives context to how those numbers were reached. It's just not plucked out of the air. So I would be keen for us to take these numbers as a reference point for discussion. That's my opinion.
That's what I'm just going to go back to Councillor Dunn, since she's put this effort into it. Where do you see it fitting on the recommendations, which are on page 64? Because it needs to come before number 2, which 2 is seek external funding for it. So Councillor Dunn is suggesting maybe 2 becomes 3. Yes. That could you like to give us again your wording for number 2?
Seeks inclusion of 100K in year 1 and 50K each for years 2 to 10.
Yep. Thank you.
And 2018 long-term plan for Wainaki Restoration Project to protect our water supply catchment. One of the things I tried to get through there is that Wainaki is natural infrastructure. This isn't a cost that shouldn't be on, that should be on the environment section of council, that it should be on the infrastructure and assets part. But that's an aside. It's recognising the importance of this bush to our water supply, and that we should be investing in that. That we're not is gutting.
I'll second that recommendation.
Right, and so that we deal with this tidily, because we actually have the recommendations in front of us, and this is really an amendment. So I think I need to put it as an amendment, and then if it's passed, it becomes part of those recommendations. No, we haven't, Madam. We can move the amendment first, and then if it's passed, it becomes part of the recommendations. So to are we clear, Denise? We've got seek inclusion of 100k in year 1 and 50k in each of year 2 to 10 for the 2018 to 28 LTP, and Councillor Dunn had a whole lot of words on that.
Restoration project to...
Well, I don't think we need all that though.
Yeah, we do need that, because it tells you the significance of it to protect our water supply.
But the paper is all about that. If you think about what a recommendation looks like, it doesn't necessarily have to have all those words on the end of it. The paper has the words and the paper's the support. But I'll leave it with you if you want it in there. Keep it clear.
I actually think it's important, because you're going to get people who get this why not and go, what's that? You're assuming that people know that the water comes from it.
Not all the water comes from it. The dams are above. The dams are actually above the catchment. We do have it to protect the waterway, yes. Are we, yes. Is there any questions whether it's been perfectly written?
So in that light, when we're talking of 1080, is there a requirement for 1080 not to be used where there's a public water supply?
I mean, if we listen to, I'm sorry to be tough, but if we listen to what Ms Easton told us, she told us some time ago today that it was used in Hunua, which is the Auckland City urban water supply, or one of the urban water supplies. So it's not a requirement at all, is it?
So no, Madam Chair, but there would normally be a closure period. So what you would do if we were to use 1080 was we would cease using that area for water supply for with what we call a withholding period of time, which to ensure that there was no contamination of the water supply.
We shouldn't confuse the recommendations with determining what the tool is going to be, because its paper makes it really clear that that discussion is a supplementary discussion from not today's discussion. Okay. So that amendment becomes would become 2 if it's carried, and 2 becomes 3, I think, for tidiness. Is that, are you happy with that? Correct. Okay, I think...
Can I just ask a quick question? Directed at you, Lois. Would it be better to go for 100k in year 1 so we can get the initial knockdown and just focus on the next 5 years, or should we go for the whole 10-year because it's a 10-year plan? I noticed that the pest control was for 5 years.
So through you, Madam Chair, I think that,
I'm thinking longevity.
you know, as I said in my report, if you want to do this, do it as in fully. If you want to do this work, then you should fund it for the 5-year period to do the control. And there's no point in just putting money in year 1 if you're not going to then do the follow-up, because then we've just wasted a lot.
But the question was, should it go for year through to year 10, wasn't it, Councillor Dunn? So not just your paper says to year 5, but Councillor Dunn's question is, do you want it? Should it be left in? I mean, at the end of the day, there will always be a need. Won't it? I mean, even doing it for 5 years is not going to get every animal out of it. We're going to have to keep on it.
Yes, Madam Chair. Basically, I mean, once you're in the game of pest control, you're committed to long-term control that they keep breeding, unfortunately.
Okay, so we're quite clear. Yes. Item to become item 2 is the recommendation moved by Councillor Dunn and seconded by Councillor Stoltz as an amendment. I'll put that to the meeting. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. It has been, becomes now part of the actual total recommendation, which appears on page 63, notes the content of report, and in particular, A and B, little 2, which you've just agreed, and 3. So we put all of those recommendations. Is there someone prepared to move? No. Councillor McLean. Moved, Councillor McLean. Is it second, and Councillor Dunn?
Yep.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms Easton, for the report. And we move to the Food Implementation Act at page 163 to 167. Thank you, Ms Robertson. Thank you. We assume everyone's read the report, but if you wish to add to anything, please tell us. Yes, you need to turn it on. Thank you.
So I've nothing to add, but just to emphasise that the Food Act has been a successful process implementing it through our district. We are finding as time progresses, a lot of food businesses are finding real value from the change that's come their way. And as understanding and application of it beds down, yeah, it's having some really good gains in terms of new business being able to start up and function, and the quality of food safety control raising generally across the board in food business.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Moved Councillor Dunn.
I'll second.
Seconded Councillor Stokes. Are there any questions? Just for clarity, on the first page, Ms Robertson at 163, will and require the horticultural sector. Is that saying those who grow citrus and etc. will be included?
That's right. So it's particularly at growers and packers, so where you've got pack houses and similar, and it's the transition of the growing of it to the sale of it, the transition component. So
thank you. Any further questions? I'll put the recommendation then. We're noting the content of the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary carried. Thank you very much. Excuse me. And we now have the Sustainable Hill Country Project update at 168 to 173. Ms Easton again, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take the report as read if there's any questions the committee might have.
Are there questions? Councillor Stoll?
I had two questions, and one I discussed with Councillor Seymour earlier. I assume there's a lack of uptake by some parties because there are some financial investment required and then you can claim the money back. Or why would people be hesitant to get involved in this process?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think there's a whole host of different reasons, and until very recently, I think that was a key reason, and many people aren't aware now that the ECFP has changed, and that people might have had a grant in the past and not be aware that even if they've had a grant in the past, they're now eligible to have some upfront funding. So that's certainly information we're trying to communicate out really widely to people to try and get them to sort of activate their planting activity. But I think that the thing that we're finding now is that the vast majority of sites where no treatment and no works plan, no engagement has happened is actually largely because of the combination of the tenure and the governance of those properties. So a lot of the properties that are in that 104 where we really haven't managed to do anything are multiply owned properties. Many of them are unincorporated, so there can literally be 100 owners, and so trying to have a decision making is quite difficult. Having a contact person, some of this land is not occupied by the owners at all, and so it might be that a family member or one of the family members might be living there, but it's often it's quite difficult to actually identify who has decision-making authority. So that's those, and I think those are the properties that we will not actually be able to sort out before the compliance deadline. I guess as I've signalled in the report, what does concern me is there are some other properties where they do need to take action. They have the capability to, and we need to give a clear message that actually we do mean this is serious, that they do have to do this work.
Councillor Stoll?
Just supplementary to that. So I can't find when we started with the ECFP. What year did we start with?
So through you, Madam Chair, the actual ECFP started in 1992, so it was entirely voluntary then. And I think Councillor Seymour probably knows the exact date better than me, but I think it's 2008 is when our plan change to introduce Overlay 3A came in. And we did give ourselves an exceedingly ambitious timeline to have everyone having a works plan by 2011. So perhaps not surprising we didn't meet that because it was, over 500 properties. But I do think that that time frame to 2021 to actually do the work was quite a reasonable allowance of time, 14 years.
And it was a requirement of the Crown that to continue to receive the funding, we needed to make it compulsory because the uptake wasn't adequate, wasn't it?
So the question that I have, we've had several years of incentives to get people on board, which was successful in one regard. Lots of people have taken it up. There's a chunk, 104 properties that have not taken it up. Now we're moving out of that in the next few years where we talk about enforcement. So how are we going to enforce? What are we going to ask of people? We've been asking them for 20 years. Now that it's changed to enforcement action, what are we going to do? Are we going to go there and plant on their land? No.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think this is the difficult issue for the council when we put this as a rule in our plan. I do talk often to my colleagues at the Ministry of Primary Industry who imagine we just send them all a court order and everyone will immediately run out to plant trees. But I think that we will have to actually have a plan of what we're going to do. We need to identify at that time, you will have to do on a site-by-site basis, which property, what are the reasons that they haven't complied, and we'll end up, I think, doing a bit of a triaging, but we do need to consider what this land needs to be treated for erosion. And in actual fact, in some ways, if it's not treated for erosion, it undermines all of the effort that all of the landowners who have treated their land have done, because it is literally spewing so much sediment into the environment. And certainly the research that's been done by Landcare and others indicates that for the large gullies, if they're not treated, then we, at the moment, for example, in the Waipu, we see 36 million tonnes of sediment go down that river a year. If the gullies in the Waipu are not treated, by 2050, that number will be doubled. So the environmental impacts of not addressing the erosion are massive. And so therefore we have to somehow get it treated. So we have been working for a long time, obviously, in the kind of gentle, soft, assist approach, but there will be an area of land that's not been successful for, and we do need to work out how we're going to address it. And in the case of where there are agencies that are incorporated or whatever, there is a mechanism through the courts. And certainly I have flagged in the report, it's of concern to me that Te Tumu Paeroa, which administers a lot of land, has not done any work at all to implement the works plans that they've signed. So they have 2.5 years to establish effective tree cover on the number of properties that they administer, and they have not started. So that is of significant concern.
And the point is they do have signed farm plans. It's
yes.
not like...
So we are actively reminding them with the farm plans.
Sure we are.
Yes.
And there is one person employed based out of Victoria by MPI, I think, under that project, plus 1.5 here in GDC.
That's correct.
So there is, 2.5 FTEs of people with the dedicated time to work with landowners to see that this project does happen, because it is absolutely critical. I mean, Councillor Stoltz, some of it would be the land that you saw when you flew over the water plan, which are great big grey open weeping wounds, if you like, that don't stop slipping in heavy rainfall events. So it is very critical. I think the council officers need to be commended for the amount of work that has been done, and I acknowledge, following Councillor Stoltz's question, which you've acknowledged, Ms Easton, in the report, that the approach with respect to any punitive action is quite a challenge. But we need to be realistic. We are going to need to require people to implement erosion control, and there are a range of options, far more options now than there were when the project first was introduced, wasn't it? Any other questions with respect to the paper?
Good. I'll move the paper.
So we have several, and we have the recommendation on page 168 and 169.
Yes.
And I'm sure you'll come back to us with some, I mean, it isn't, it's a resource consent matter anyway, isn't it? The overlay 3A. I'll just ask Mr Zanham to comment on it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we will have to come back with an enforcement strategy, which we'll put before Council in terms of how we'll approach it and options for getting people on board. But as you know, with anything, the first step, as Lois has pointed out, is that the persuasive method or incentivization to do it. That we're now coming to the stage where we actually have to look at a comprehensive strategy in terms of how we actually approach enforcement and what levels would take.
Take out the carried away.
On-farm field days, as on page 172, on-farm field days and further comment on the farming pages of the Gisborne Herald, I think are really good initiatives. And that's what happened in the very beginning when we started to take that out. They were woolshed meetings in small clusters, and landowners were brought together and council officers attended, and councillors were invited where those properties were in any one councillor's ward, and they were a part of that continual educative process, because that's what it's about, isn't it? Thank you. So we have a move, Councillor Stoltz. Did we have a seconder? Councillor McLean. There's no further questions. I'll put that in. All those in favour of the recommendations, please say aye. Aye. Contrary carried. Thank you very much, Ms Easton, and your team. It is a challenge. We move to page 174, and that's the Freedom and Summer Camping Report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a joint paper from both the enforcement side of things. So with us today, Jim isn't here, but Gary McKenzie, the team leader for enforcement, is here, and Garrett Blair from the contracts and asset management team. I'm not sure if you're going to have a little bit of a chat about the paper or take it as read with questions.
Yeah, just take it as read.
Thank you. Other questions, council officers, councillors? Just for the point of clarity, I think on page 175 when I was reading it, under summer camping at number 3, and it's the third bullet point from the bottom, to be clear, that should say Tolaga Bay Blue Waters, shouldn't it? Because that's, there's 2 areas around Tolaga Bay, so just to be... Yeah, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thank you. I do have some questions and a couple of comments actually, but I'll ask a question first. Makarori in particular, when you've gone and visited there, have you had other comments from other users other than the Freedom Campers at all?
Madam Chair, yeah, we've had plenty of kind of telephone calls from concerned people about Makarori in particular, and the problem we have with Makarori is we don't have an out-of-hours facility to go and monitor freedom camping. So if we turn up at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning to monitor who's there, if people turn around and tell us that they're there for the day surfing, we've got nothing that we can, you know, it's really difficult to enforce from that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's general concern about the numbers that's out at Makarori at present.
Right, okay.
Sorry, what was generally accepted? It was just hard to catch your voice.
Oh.
What did you say at the end is generally accepted?
No, what I was saying is out at Makarori, the general response is that there's a large amount of people camping out there, but from an enforcement point of view, it's really difficult to monitor. We don't have a out-of-hours capability. And so when we go out to monitor, say 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, most people we speak to, if they tell us that they're there just for surfing during the day, we've got nothing to argue against. And anyone that does say that they have been camping, we obviously just tell them what the rules and regulations are around that.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah, so would that be, are you getting a kind of a similar response with Marina Car Park as far as camping goes there?
Through Madam Chair, the Marina Car Park causes a few issues because of the fact that they don't have to be in a self-contained vehicle. That's caused quite a few issues because a lot of people don't think it's good look, because a lot of people are using the toilets to wash dishes. Some are using the toilets to bathe in.
Makarori's the same though. It's no, it's,
yeah, and but it's a fact that it used to be that they had to be in a self-contained vehicle at the marina, but then they changed the bylaw to say that they didn't have to be in a self-contained vehicle, and that's caused quite a lot of confusion with the local public. Plus, generally, it's a bad look.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, because the only other comment I'd make is that when you look at the RFSs and that, you would think there's not a problem at either of these two places, but in particular Makarori, and there has been a comment in there about a petition being passed as well. But you know, I'm a representative of the community, and part of that is the surfing community, which is a huge part. And there, I would say there's over 90% of that community is not happy with that car park being used for freedom camping. And you know, I think when the review comes up, I think that'll probably come to light as well with submissions and everything. But I mean, I know we're just looking at the monitoring side of it now, But I would hate to think that because there's so minimal interest as far as RFSs go, that is reflective of the concerns of the community out there.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Councillor, did you wish to speak, Councillor Cranston?
I think the problem we've got at the moment is it's getting so confused, and it's confused down the South Island as well. I mean, we see we've got prohibited camping, restricted camping, summer camping. If you're an outsider that's coming to Gisborne, never been here before, you're really confused about what you can do where. And I think we've got to get on top of that somehow. I mean, you can't really expect these people to come in, look at a map and have that familiarity about where they actually can do and what they can't do. And I think we've got to find some way of getting that clarity. And that's going to come through when we're going through the bylaw at community development, I would say.
Councillor Borrihinger and then Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the end of the day, it is about our responsibility around communication of the message and enforcement. That's what our primary regulatory role is. So to ensure that, because I personally don't take the numbers of the RFSs in here as an indication as to what the issue is. I personally feel that prior to that, if we're getting the enforcement stuff right, then there's no need for our community to actually be ringing in to do the RFSs. I mean, the Marina car park is just right out there, right? So we shouldn't have to RFS those kinds of things. So this could be an indication of that the staff have been just been enforcing out there. But that's what I would like to see in regards to freedom camping.
Councillor, thank you. Councillor Dunn.
Yes, I was just checking our governance plans for both community development, environment and planning, and I see that the review of the bylaw, freedom camping bylaw, isn't there. Are we doing it are we reviewing that freedom camping bylaw this year?
Not this year.
Which is community development, I believe.
Are you talking about the Community Development and Services Committee?
Yeah. That's where the bylaw is happening, is the review of the freedom camping bylaw, is that correct?
It's through you, Madam Chair. So this morning at Community Development and Services, we talked about the public places bylaw review and the reserves bylaw review, which Community Development and Services agreed to initiate the review of. We also talked briefly about central government's work that they're doing at the moment around reviewing freedom camping in New Zealand, and that it's not the right time now to review the freedom camping bylaw, given that we've reviewed it 3 times over the last 4 years to try and resolve it. So what we do need to do is respond to what the government comes up with and feed into that process and review the bylaw following that process. The freedom camping bylaw doesn't cover the issue of summer camping. So as Councillor Cranston was saying before, we have 2 sorts of camping, freedom camping and summer camping. Now, the difference between the 2 is quite slight in terms of what people can expect. But in terms of our ability to enforce the 2, there's quite a difference. We can enforce freedom camping, but we can't enforce summer camping behaviour, because it's not covered by the freedom camping bylaw. I'm hopeful that the public places and the reserves bylaw will actually help us to address that issue.
So supplementary, we got a petition from a local surfer, and we indicated that we were reviewing our freedom camping bylaw, but we probably should go back to that person and tell them we're actually put it on hold.
Waiting for the government.
Until we wait for and perhaps we should let people know that we won't be changing anything before the next freedom camping season, very possibly.
What answer was that going to Councillor Dunn's query? You got a yes. I just didn't
Madam
hear
Chair,
it.
I think the answer would be yes.
Thank you, Councillor Stoltz and then Councillor Foster.
Because this all happened after the government pushed through quick legislation around the Rugby World Cup 2011, and that's when, after that, we have reviewed and tried to tidy it up, but it is no easy feat. But what I want to ask Mr. White is, are there a time frame for the government to try and tidy this up so that we can plan accordingly, or are they not giving us a firm time frame at all?
Through the chair, as far as I'm aware, there is no definite time frame, but I think it's fair to say that the government is actually taking a really serious look at it, and they're trying to do it in a collaborative way.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. Can I just add that we certainly this year, in response to complaints from previous years, we did ramp up quite significantly our presence in terms of educating the public in terms of freedom campaign. So there were quite a few dawn patrols, certainly, and before 7 o'clock, there were staff actually out there at about daybreak, 6 o'clock and stuff, going and monitoring Marina car park and some of the areas to where surfing is occurring, Makarori and other places. There is, as has been acknowledged, quite a confusion between the two and what actually applies. So it is a challenge. Sometimes there are people who just don't understand. Sometimes we followed up with people in terms of enforcement action, in terms of issued infringements, but they've left the country. So it becomes very difficult for us. But having said all of that, there is a concerted effort by staff to enforce and get the message across. What we have flagged is that we are spread thin, that there are no budgets in terms of that. The paper has indicated that there's some work to be done in terms of the summer camping and freedom camping bit up at Loysel's Beach, and we're looking at plans and in certain areas, certainly through our submissions in attendance of the LTP. There has been some discussions on how we could better move forward some of the plans to actually do that. So staff are looking at it, staff are addressing it along with all the other areas that might suffer because we might have to divert effort either towards jumping down at the boat ramp or ramping things up, but it is a challenge for us.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thank you. I think we got it really wrong by allowing freedom camping at Makarori, and I think the surfing community and a lot of the other community, the community at Makarori and a lot of the beach community at Wainui are totally opposed to it. And if we don't have the review this year, we're going to be bombarded with huge amounts of complaints prior to next summer. So, I would be promoting that we have a facility of some sort that we really seriously look at the freedom camping activity at Makarori and even the Marina car park. I live at Kaiti Beach and I promoted Kaiti Beach. I've got no problem with that whatsoever myself. I think it's working really well there and it could be actually expanded. But Makarori in particular and supplementary Marina car park, I think are of huge concern to a lot of people out there. And I would like to see us address that sooner than later, because I know how long processes take. And I would like to see that we have this implemented, a new regime for next summer, and have the available for the community to submit on it.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I would just have to say, in respect to that, that it is in my ward and not one person has rung me and complained about it. They may know that you are listening to their complaints, and I drive by many times of the week, not quite every day, and often quite early. And we need to rationalise what we want to happen in this town, don't we? One minute we're busy saying we really value tourists, and a lot of those people are young people that, just like our young people, travel around the world and use the opportunity to travel in a van and freedom camp. So we either want tourists to come here. I suspect half of them come because they love the surf at Makarori. So are they surfers or are they freedom campers? They may be both at that one time, and they use that car park because they want to catch the waves first thing in the morning. So I appreciate that it's a real challenge for council officers. And last week, before the weather broke, it was clearly very popular. There were a lot of vans there, but there would have been room for some surfy locals to park if they had wished. Change in the weather, and there are only 3 there at 7:30 this morning. Absolutely. But it does interest me, and council officers might like to follow up on it, because we did have an undertaking, I understand, from T Roads and our roading team that car park was going to be tar sealed and marked in March this year. And that doesn't seem to have happened. So maybe we need council officers to look at how that all fits together, please. Or you're going to respond? Thank you.
Through the Madam Chair, I believe Tairāwhiti Roads are in the process of starting that work very shortly. I was involved in a meeting last week that was finalising some of the design components and civil construction works to formalise that car park. We're also working with key stakeholders in the area, such as the Ferris Family Trust, to bring them along on the journey as well.
Thank you. And I mean, it may be that we need to extend that area of freedom camping for a particular, the space that's available. And I'm perfectly aware that some of the land adjacent is private, but it is a really popular place, and the summer is beautiful in this part of the world, and many, many visitors come here. So do we either want to make a place for them to park safely where there are facilities, or do we want to chase them away? So I just put that out there. We have to work out what it is that we genuinely want to happen for our community. And then you're right, let our local residents submit on it if they wish. I mean, they don't often camp down the very far end, which is not a legal camping place, but I do observe the occasional vehicle parked in there. Yeah. But that's very popular with local swimmers and with the local surf school. And it is a beautiful beach that is, part of our heritage, I guess.
So the only other comment is that, look, it is a major surfing part. There's actually 3 surf breaks there of national significance on the National Coastal Policy Statement there. It is a surfing area. It is not an area to camp. Now, you've got a lot of surfers that come and stay there overnight. I mean, I camped there myself in the day. That's why I came here. I would never try to detract from that. They will be there anyway. They don't need to be staying overnight. They'll probably camp in town and then drive out there and surf all day. So the problem is, if you've got people camping there overnight, freedom camping are supposed to be gone by 8:30 in the morning. They're there all day because the surf's pumping. So, there's a conflict there. So the simple solution is get rid of the conflict. If there's no freedom camping, it's still going to be packed. So because many days you go out there, I can't, you go there on a good surf day, the car park surfing has got so popular in that particular area because the surf is so good. We've outgrown our facility. So if the facility is not going to be expanded, then you're going to have major conflicts happening.
Right, thank you. Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, following on from Councillor Foster, back in the day, we used to be able to park right up that hill, and parking never used to be a problem when you went surfing. Now everyone's been confined into that little car park at the bottom, and hence the conflict. So under the freedom camping bylaw, there is 3 reasons you can prohibit it. One of them is public access. So we've got all the evidence we need that we've got an access problem to the beach in that area. But what I wanted to ask was, can we go ahead and modify this bylaw and remove Makarori as a freedom camping site without having to wait for the government to tell us what's going on? Because
we have to consult.
Is that just not a cost-effective way?
You can't just do it randomly. Council Officer would like to respond.
That's what we're going to get asked, right? By the public.
Yep.
Through you, Madam Chair, I actually can't answer that question. That's a question for our strategy team, but we could come back with a response on that.
That might not be what the public at large want, though. That may be a view that has been expressed today, but we would have to consult on it. We couldn't just do it randomly. But what about the visitors? And where is that? Anyway, it is an issue. I agree. We need some further information. Councillor Cranston?
Yeah, just a comment. I mean, I think it will be central government that will kickstart this properly. And if you think that you're hearing a lot around this table, it's a whisper compared to what's happening down the South Island. And I think the enormity of the noise that's going on down there will bring this issue on a central government basis to us a lot quicker.
Being mindful, though, if we introduce a regime that bans it in any one area, then we will be spending a whole lot more money on monitoring, won't we? Because you will have to have council officers out there seeing that any decision that is made is upheld. So we just need to be aware of that as well. I just made a note as respect to the Loisel summer camping area. I just want to know how long it was going to take to prepare a detailed response to the issues, because that's what item 13 on page 177 says. So how long do we think that will take to prepare a detailed response to those issues around safety and parking, etc. there?
Through the Madam Chair, we're currently working on the design of the area. to alleviate those issues that we're currently facing. So we expect that to be finalised in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Thank you. Right. Well, thank you, Mr. White. Welcome.
I'd just like to add to Mr. Blair's comments. So the feedback that we've had from people in respect to Loisels is broad and extensive around issues that they observed over the summer. And this is why I talk about summer camping being a different question to freedom camping. So freedom camping, yes, we can enforce. Summer camping, we can't enforce. Now, I think the issues that we have at Loisels are partly around design in terms, so for councillors who have been there, in terms of the day visitor use and the camping visitor use, it's the same entrance, it's the same issues around car parking. There are plenty of challenges there in terms of design, but we can't forget that there are also challenges there in terms of our ability to monitor and enforce behaviour there as well. And they are some of the questions that have been raised by people who have come to us for our request for through our request for service system. So there's a lot of questions to be answered. Some of those questions are going to be quite difficult and may take some time to answer.
Thank you. So that's a good discussion. I appreciate everyone's perspectives and the information brought to the table. The recommendation is for noting on page 174. Is there a mover, please? Moved, Councillor Dunn, seconded. Moved, Councillor Dunn, seconded, Councillor Stoltz, and noted the content of the report. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. And we have paper on page 189 to 195, the update on the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm trying to come to the name. Thank you, Ms. Sykes. I could have the Christian name, but since it's my principle of being formal at meetings, I was having a quick rack of the brain to come up with the surname. Thank you. Thank you very much and welcome. This is the first time since you've been back in our organisation that you've reported to this committee, so welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll take the report as read. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Interesting subject. Thank you, Councillor. Seconding, Councillor Forrihanger. Note the work, continued work that will be happening on page 190. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. The increase in the particulate smog in Gisborne, I would have thought it would have been going the other way. Do you know why it's going up?
Not really, which is why we're undertaking the project this winter. It's becoming a little bit more evident in the winter months that you see a lot of particulate smoke, particularly around Whataupoko and also out towards Heath Johnson Park. So we're just trying to get a handle on what's happening. We think there's some breaches happening of our levels in the air shed at the moment, or the air environment, which is why we're needing to investigate it further. Modern fires should do, but we do have a lot of older wood burners in our town. We also have a lot of open fires still. People haven't put in wood burners.
Any further questions? Councillor Dunn.
Is it mainly just going to be fires? Could it be things like pollen in the air? Or
pollen is usually a larger particulate matter. It's usually over 2.5. Yeah.
If not, I'll put that then to the meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. I've had no request for general business. We've got a workshop? No. Got a workshop on anything? No. So I'll declare the meeting closed and thank everyone for their discussion. Thank you and participation. Excellent. That's freedom camping.
I think we're going to get some government.